Hi, I'm Sarah, and today I'm going to share a story that's very personal to me. It's about my family, the struggles we went through, and how things went wrong because of favoritism. Before I start, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more real-life stories like this. Now, let's begin. Growing up in a family where you're not the favorite is really hard. Imagine always being in the shadow of your younger brother, Ryan, just because he overcame serious health issues as a baby. No matter what my older brother JN and I did, it was never enough. My mom would always ask, "Sarah, can you help Ryan with his homework again?" It didn't matter if I had my own work to do, Ryan's needs were always more important. At dinner, the conversation was always about Ryan. "Did you hear? Ryan got the lead role in the school play," my dad would brag, as if JN and I hadn't achieved anything ourselves. Our successes were usually met with a simple, "That's nice," or a distracted nod. JN was always quiet, but over the years, I could see the frustration building up inside him. Things really hit a breaking point when we were in college. We both went to the same university, which should have been a time for us to be closer, but instead, Ryan caused more problems. One evening, I found Ryan in the living room, looking guilty as he quickly closed some tabs on the computer. "What are you doing on JN's laptop?" I asked. "Just borrowing some notes," Ryan muttered, but his smirk told me something else was going on. A few days later, JN was in a panic. "I can't find my final project. It's like it disappeared from my laptop," he said, his voice full of fear and anger. After some searching, we found out that Ryan had deleted JN's entire semester's work. "Why would you do that?" I confronted Ryan later. "Come on, Sarah, it's just a bit of sibling rivalry. Besides, JN's always been too good at everything. He needed to be knocked down a bit," Ryan said casually, as if he hadn't just destroyed JN's hard work. "That was the last straw for JN. I can't take it anymore," he told me one evening as he packed up his things. "I'm tired of always being second best in my own family because of him." And with that, JN moved out. He cut off most of his ties with our family, leaving without looking back. It wasn't just about the project. It was years of feeling ignored and unappreciated, all coming to a head with that one act of betrayal by Ryan. As JN drove away that night, I knew things would never be the same. I stood in the driveway, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. I knew then that things would never be the same. Our family was broken, and deep down, I feared it was beyond repair. That's where I'll pause the story for now. There's a lot more drama to unfold. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates. Next time, I'll talk about how JN managed to rebuild his life and the new challenges he faced. Stick around, it's going to be quite the journey. After JN left our family home, he didn't just survive, he thrived. His journey of building a new life, far from the toxic environment of our family, eventually led him to Emily, a woman whose strength and understanding matched his own. Today, I'll dive into that chapter of his life, revealing how he found happiness and love amid the chaos. "Are you sure about this place?" Emily asked as they toured a potential venue for their wedding. The sun set perfectly behind the hills, casting a golden glow that seemed to mark the beginning of a new chapter. "Absolutely, Emily, it's perfect, just like us. It's far away from everything, and everyone, that made life difficult," JN replied, his eyes focused on the venue but also on a future free of past hurts and resentments. As they planned their wedding, the topic of family naturally came up. "JN, I know it's tough, but are you sure we shouldn't invite Ryan? Maybe it's time to mend things," Emily suggested gently one evening, her voice soft as she tried to tread carefully on the sensitive topic. JN paused, his voice heavy with the weight of the past. "I've tried, Emily, but Ryan hasn't changed. Remember last Christmas when I tried to reach out? All he did was brag about his new car, like everything's a competition." "Yeah, I remember. He could barely say congratulations on our engagement without turning the conversation to his promotion at work," Emily said, her frustration showing. "Okay, no Ryan, but what about your parents? I want them there. Despite everything, they're still my parents. But if they choose Ryan over coming to our wedding, that's on them," JN said, his decision firm but with a touch of sadness. The wedding day arrived, a beautiful ceremony set against the backdrop of the hills they had fallen in love with. I was there, watching as JN and Emily exchanged vows, a testament to their strength and love. The absence of our parents, who chose to stay with Ryan, lingered in the air, but it didn't ruin the happiness of the day. At the reception, amidst the laughter and music, Emily leaned over to JN and whispered, "I know today is bittersweet without your parents here, but remember, we are our own family now, and Sarah is here, right? JN smiled, squeezing Emily's hand. You're right. Sarah being here means the world to me. It shows who really supports us, who truly cares. Later that night, as we danced under the string lights, JN came over to me. Thanks for being here, Sarah. It means more than you know. I wouldn't miss it for the world, JN. Seeing you this happy is all I could ask for, I replied, feeling both joy for him and a pang of sadness for the family members who weren't present. As the night drew to a close, JN and Emily stood together, looking out at the guests, people who were part of their chosen family. They had built a circle of love and support, far from the judgment and competition of our family home. JN's story of finding love and creating a new life is a reminder of how much strength it takes to choose happiness over sticking with what's familiar. Tune in next time as I reveal more about the twists and turns our family went through, and how JN continued to face challenges, especially at the annual family dinner. At that dinner, the air was thick with tension, like a pot about to boil over. We were seated in a grand dining room where every plate and piece of silverware seemed to echo the unresolved conflicts of our past. JN and Emily entered, bracing themselves for the usual drama that clung to our family gatherings like an unwelcome shadow. As the evening wore on, Ryan made his entrance, wearing a smug smile as he introduced his wife, Lisa. Lisa had once been romantically involved with JN, making the situation even more uncomfortable. Looks like I got the better end of the deal, huh? Ryan joked loudly, nudging JN in a way that felt more like provocation than brotherly banter. His comment about stealing JN's ex-girlfriend hung in the air, each word a deliberate poke at old wounds. Emily's face flushed with anger as she watched Ryan smirk. She turned to him, her voice steady but laced with the frustration that had been building all night. Really, Ryan? Is this how you show your maturity? Bragging about things that aren't even true? It's pathetic. Ryan laughed, a hollow sound that did nothing to calm the tension. Emily, relax. I was just joking. You married folks take everything too seriously. That's not a joke, Ryan, Emily shot back, now standing, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. It's a cheap jab in front of everyone. JN ended that relationship for reasons you clearly don't respect. As Emily's voice rose, the rest of the family shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. The sound of silverware clinking stopped for a moment as our mother tried to calm things down. Her voice was soft, though you could hear her bias. Emily, dear, let's not make a scene. Ryan didn't mean anything by it. But Emily wasn't having it. No, I think it's time we talk about the elephant in the room. Ryan has always been spoiled, and it's time someone called him out. His entitlement, and you too, she pointed to our parents, have let him get away with it. The room went silent. You could feel the tension in the air. JN reached for Emily's hand, silently showing his support. Ryan, you spent your whole life trying to compete with me. For what? To prove you're better? You're not. You're just willing to step on others to get what you want, JN said firmly. Ryan's face turned red, his usual arrogance fading. You think you're so perfect, JN? Just because you moved out, you think you can judge me? You left us. I left a toxic environment that you love, Ryan, JN replied. And I'm better off for it. The dinner ended quickly. The festive mood was gone, replaced by a heavy silence as JN and Emily walked out. The rest of the family sat in shock, left to think about the hard truths that had been spoken. The confrontation wasn't just about words. It was about deep-rooted issues that could no longer be ignored. What was supposed to be a happy family dinner had turned into a battleground where long-hidden resentments came to light. It wasn't about a simple comment or an old girlfriend anymore, it was about years of unfairness and hurt that had finally reached the breaking point. The fallout from the dinner came fast. Word of Emily's passionate defense of JN spread among our relatives, and the rift in the family grew deeper. The next morning, JN got messages from cousins, all shocked and supportive of him. Just saw the video. Can't believe it took this long for someone to put Ryan in his place, one cousin texted, with a mix of surprise and relief. Another cousin called, frustrated. I always knew Ryan was a jerk, but this? This is something else. Emily really spoke for all of us last night. As the video of the confrontation spread, Ryan and our parents scrambled to save their reputations. Ryan called Jan early that morning, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "You need to tell everyone Emily overreacted, Jan. You know how she can get. Just smooth things over, man." Jan remained calm, his frustration built up over the years. "No, Ryan. I'm not covering for you anymore." Emily said what needed to be said. "You need to start taking responsibility for your actions." Their parents also got involved, pleading with Jan during a tense phone call. "Your brother is hurt, Jan. Can't you see what this is doing to the family?" their mother asked, her voice cracking with emotion. Their father, more forceful, added, "You need to control your wife, Jan. She's tearing this family apart." Jan's response was steady, but firm. "No, Dad. What's tearing this family apart is years of ignoring Ryan's behavior and brushing the rest of us aside. I stand by Emily," she spoke the truth. The wider family had mixed reactions. Some pulled away, uncomfortable with the conflict, while others found the courage to speak up, inspired by Emily's boldness. Family gatherings became tense, filled with whispered conversations and awkward glances. In one revealing phone call, an aunt admitted, "We've all seen it for years, but no one wanted to stir the pot. Ryan's always been your parents' favorite, and it hasn't done him any favors." Emily, tired but determined, replied, "I know it's messy, but maybe it's time everything came out. We can't heal as a family if we keep pretending these problems don't exist." As the weeks passed, Emily's outburst, which had been recorded, sparked conversations throughout the family. People began talking about favoritism, fairness, and how families should really treat each other. Jan and Emily found themselves at the center of a family storm, but for the first time, they weren't alone in their fight for respect and recognition. The video exposed long-hidden issues, forcing the family to face uncomfortable truths. Though painful, it was a necessary step toward understanding and, possibly, healing. But for Jan and Emily, it became clear that their path was different now, with or without the family's approval. As the dust settled from the drama, Jan and Emily made a tough but necessary decision. Sitting in their living room, they discussed their future with new clarity, shaped by the chaos of recent events. "Emily, I can't keep going back and forth, hoping things will change. It's not healthy for us or for our baby on the way," Jan said firmly. Emily nodded, resting her hand on her belly. "I agree, Jan. We need to focus on our family now. What kind of environment do we want for our child?" They made the decision to cut ties with Ryan and their parents. This wasn't a sudden choice, but the result of years of neglect and unresolved conflict. Jan carefully drafted an email to his parents, making their decision clear. "Mom and Dad, after much thought, Emily and I have decided to distance ourselves for the sake of our family's well-being. We need to focus on raising our child in a positive and supportive environment, free from the constant conflict of the past." With that, they chose a new path, one focused on building a better future for their own family. Their parents responded quickly, filled with pleas and accusations, but Jan and Emily stayed firm. They ignored the phone calls and left messages unread. It was a hard process, but it had to be done. Meanwhile, I, Sarah, also chose to support John and Emily. During a small family meeting with just the three of us, I told them how much I stood by their decision. "You both have always been there for me. Unlike Ryan or even Mom and Dad lately, I'm with you, whatever you need," I said. John smiled and squeezed my hand. "Thanks, Sarah. It means everything to know you're with us. Let's focus on the family we choose, not just the one we were born into." As John and Emily prepared for their baby's arrival, they found peace and happiness in their new life. They worked on the nursery, picking out colors and decorations that represented a fresh start. Emily, being the planner, made sure everything was just right, and this attention to detail brought them both comfort. One evening, after setting up the crib, Emily turned to Jan thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about the future and what it'll be like for our child?" John finished placing a stuffed animal in the crib and wrapped his arms around her. "I do, and I know that with us as their parents, they'll grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally. That's all we can hope for." As the seasons changed and spring began, it symbolized the new beginnings in John and Emily's lives. The support they received from me and other family members helped reassure them that they had made the right decision. It wasn't just about leaving behind the toxic past, It was about building a future based on respect, love, and understanding. Standing in the nursery, looking out at the blooming garden, John and Emily knew they had made the right choice. They were ready to welcome their child into a world filled with hope, one they had created, far away from the shadows of the past. That's the end of the story. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think John and Emily were right to cut ties with their family, or could they have handled it differently? Share your opinions in the comments below. If you liked this story and want to hear more, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. Before I get into my story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. You'll want to stay for this crazy story. I'm just your average 17-year-old. Except for this illness, that's been tough on me for as long as I can remember. It's just been me and my dad, Mark. Since my mom passed away when I was little, we've always been super close. He's been my rock, especially with all the doctor visits and medications I need. Life was pretty normal until Veronica showed up. Dad met her at work, and she charmed her way into our lives. At first, I was happy about it. Dad deserved to be happy, right? Veronica seemed nice, always bringing me small gifts and saying sweet things. One day, she suggested we have a girls' night. Sarah, honey, how about we do face masks and watch that new romantic comedy you mentioned? Veronica asked. I was excited. That sounds awesome. Maybe we could order pizza too? Of course, anything for my new daughter, she replied with a wink, but something about that wink felt off. Things moved quickly. Before I knew it, Dad was proposing to Veronica, and she was showing off a huge engagement ring. Sarah, what do you think about having Veronica as your stepmom? Dad asked, looking hopeful. I forced a smile. If she makes you happy, Dad, then I'm happy. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Veronica moved in, and I really tried to get along with her. We had family dinners where she'd ask about school, but things always felt strange. So, Sarah, how's that science project going? She'd ask. It's good, still working on the hypothesis, I'd say. Well, don't stress too much. It's not like you're curing cancer or anything, she'd joke, but her laugh never seemed real. Then came that night. I woke up with terrible pain, like my body was falling apart. Dad, help, I cried. He rushed into my room, panicked. Sarah, what's wrong? Talk to me, he said, worried. It hurts, Dad, it really hurts, I whimpered. Veronica stood at the doorway. Mark, maybe we should wait. You know how dramatic teenagers can be. But Dad ignored her. He picked me up and rushed me to the car. As we sped to the hospital, I saw Veronica's reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked strange. Annoyed, like my pain was a bother to her or something. I watched Veronica from my hospital bed. In the ER, while the doctors were checking me out, I overheard Dad and Veronica talking outside my room. Mark, these hospital bills are going to be huge. Are you sure this isn't just? Veronica started. Just what? Veronica? Our daughter is in pain. Nothing else matters right now. Dad cut her off. Our daughter. That should have made me feel good, but the way Veronica said, sure, of course, sent chills down my spine. As I lay there with IVs and monitors hooked up to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot worse, and I was right. After that night, everything started going downhill. I missed more school than I attended, and my treatments got even more intense. One morning, I overheard Dad and Veronica arguing in the kitchen. Mark, these bills are insane. We can't keep this up, Veronica said. What do you want me to do, Veronica? She's my daughter, Dad replied, frustrated. I'm just saying, maybe she's exaggerating a bit, you know, for attention, Veronica suggested. I couldn't believe it. My own stepmom thought I was faking. I wanted to storm in and tell her off, but my body had other plans. A sharp wave of pain hit me, and I collapsed to the floor. Dad, help, I called out. They both rushed in, but Veronica's face showed it all. She looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted their argument. Oh, Sarah, again? Don't you think you're being a bit dramatic? She said in this fake sweet voice that made my skin crawl. Dad looked confused. Honey, are you sure you're not just stressed about school? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you kidding me? I can barely stand, I shouted. That's when my best friend Alex showed up. Thank God for perfect timing. Holy crap, Sarah, what's going on? Alex rushed to my side. She's fine, just being a little dramatic, Veronica said, rolling her eyes. But Alex wasn't buying it. She looks awful. We need to call an ambulance. Now. Let's not overreact, Veronica started, but Alex was already on the phone. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what I had been saying all along: my condition was serious, and I needed regular treatment. Dad looked guilty, but Veronica? She was putting on the perfect stepmom act for the medical staff. Oh, doctor, we've been so worried. Is there anything we can do to help our dear Sarah? She asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. The doctor eyed her skeptically. Well, for starters, bringing her in when she's in pain would help. I saw Veronica's mask slip for just a moment before she forced another fake smile. Later, when they thought I was asleep, I overheard Veronica talking to Dad in the hallway. Mark, this is getting out of hand. These treatments, the hospital stays, we're going to go broke, Veronica whispered harshly. But the doctor said, Dad started. Doctors say a lot of things, Mark. They're just trying to make money off us. Sarah's young, she'll bounce back. Maybe what she really needs is some tough love, Veronica replied. I couldn't believe it. She didn't care about me at all. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tough love? I was seriously ill, not throwing a tantrum. I don't know, Veronica. What if, Dad started? Trust me, Mark, I've dealt with kids before. Sometimes they just need a push to overcome these things. We cut off the treatments. Make her face life head-on. She'll thank us later, Veronica said confidently. There was a long pause, and my heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Maybe you're right. We'll try it your way, Dad finally said. It felt like a punch in the gut. My own dad, the one person I thought I could always count on, was turning his back on me. And for what? Because his new wife told him to. As they wheeled me out of the hospital the next day, I caught Veronica's eye. She gave me this smile that chilled me to the bone, like she was saying, I won. But you know what? Game on, Veronica. If she thought I was going down without a fight, she was wrong. I might be sick, but I'm not stupid, and I definitely wasn't going to let her win this twisted game she was playing. After Dad and Veronica cut off my treatments, things got bad fast. I tried to tough it out, but it was rough. One morning, I could barely get out of bed. Sarah, get up. You'll be late for school. Veronica's sharp voice pierced through my door. I don't feel good. I think I need to stay home, I called weakly. She barged in, eyes narrowed. Oh, please, this act is getting old. Get dressed. I tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. I stumbled downstairs, and Dad looked concerned. Honey, are you okay? Maybe you should stay home, Dad asked, worried. But before I could answer, Veronica jumped in. Mark, remember what we talked about? No more coddling. Dad's face hardened. Right, Sarah, toughen up. You can't miss any more school. I couldn't believe it. It felt like I was living in some twisted alternate reality. At school, I pulled my best friend Alex aside. Dude, I need help. They've stopped my meds, my treatments, everything. Alex's eyes widened. What the hell? That's messed up. We have to do something. I'm scared, Alex. What if they put me in foster care? I said, my voice trembling. That's when Mrs. Rodriguez, my favorite teacher, overheard us. Sarah, Alex, is everything okay? She asked. Before I knew it, I was spilling everything to Mrs. Rodriguez in her classroom. Her face grew more horrified with each word. This is serious, Sarah. We need to get you help, she said firmly. But what can we do? It's my dad's word against mine, I said, feeling hopeless. Alex suddenly snapped her fingers. Evidence. We need to gather proof. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. Good thinking, Alex. Sarah, do you think you can secretly record what's happening at home? I felt a spark of hope. Yeah, I think I can do that. For the next few weeks, I became like a secret agent in my own home. I recorded Veronica's snide remarks and Dad brushing off my pain. It was hard to listen to it all again, but I knew it had to be done. One day, while I was pretending to nap on the couch, I overheard Veronica on the phone. Yes, I've transferred another $5,000. No, don't worry, Mark has no clue. He thinks it's all going to Sarah's treatments, she said. My eyes flew open. She was stealing from us. I quickly hit record on my phone, praying she wouldn't notice. Of course, I'll be careful. These idiots suspect nothing. I'll have the account drained in no time, she continued. I felt sick to my stomach, and not just because of my illness. How could Dad not see through her? The next day at school, I told Alex and Mrs. Rodriguez everything. She's stealing money too. This is insane. Alex was furious. Mrs. Rodriguez looked serious. I've contacted your previous doctors. They're horrified by what's happening and are willing to provide statements. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Thanks, Mrs. R. I just hope it's enough. As we were planning our next move, a wave of dizziness hit me. The room started to spin. Sarah, are you okay? Alex's voice sounded far away. I tried to answer, but my legs gave out. The last thing I heard was Mrs. Rodriguez shouting for someone to call 911. I woke up in the ER again. Dad was there, looking scared and confused. Veronica was trying to sweet-talk the doctor. Oh, you know how teenagers are always so dramatic. I'm sure it's just stress from school, she said. But the doctor wasn't buying it. Mrs. Thompson, your stepdaughter's condition is extremely serious. Without proper treatment, she could. Now, let's not exaggerate, Veronica interrupted. Mark and I know what's best for our Sarah. I watched as Dad's expression changed. It was like he was finally seeing her for who she really was. But before he could say anything, I felt myself fading again. As the darkness closed in, I heard Alex's voice. Don't worry, Sarah, we've got the evidence. We'll fix this. Just hang on. I wanted to tell them about the money and everything else, but the darkness was pulling me under. My last thought was, please let this plan work. I can't take much more of this. When I woke up in the hospital again, it felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Dad was there, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. There was no sign of Veronica, though. I guess the witch finally flew off on her broomstick. Sarah, baby, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you, Dad said, choking up. Before I could respond, the doctor stormed in, looking angrier than ever. Mr. Thompson, your daughter's condition is critical. The lack of treatment is borderline criminal neglect. I'm required to report this to the authorities. Dad looked like he might pass out. I didn't know. My wife. That's when Alex and Mrs. Rodriguez burst in, like they were leading a rescue mission. We've got proof, Alex shouted, waving her phone. Mrs. Rodriguez, always calm, stepped in. Mr. Thompson, Sarah's been documenting everything: neglect, verbal abuse, and financial fraud. Dad's eyes widened. Financial fraud? What are you talking about? Alex played the recordings on her phone. Veronica's voice filled the room, bragging about stealing money from our family accounts. Dad's face went from shock to devastation. I can't believe this. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool, he said. Just then, a nurse rushed in. There's been an accident. A woman named Veronica Thompson. My heart skipped a beat. Dad jumped up. What happened? She was in a high-speed collision. Apparently, she was trying to leave town with a large sum of cash. She's alive, but she's paralyzed from the neck down. The room went silent. I couldn't help but think, karma's a real thing. Dad looked like he was going to be sick. I need to go see her. Dad, after everything she did, I started, but he shook his head. I need to tell her it's over and that she's going to pay for what she did to you. As he left, Alex squeezed my hand. We did it. Sarah, you're safe now. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My treatment started up again, and slowly, I began to feel like myself. Dad filed for divorce faster than you can say gold digger, and the cops were all over Veronica. A year later, I was packing for college. Can you believe it? There were days I didn't think I'd make it to my next birthday, let alone college. Dad knocked on my door. Need any help, kiddo? Nah, I've got it. Thanks though. Things were still a bit awkward between us, but we were working on it. Sarah, I know I've said it a million times, but I'm sorry. I should have believed you, he said. I sighed. Dad, I get it. She played you. She played all of us, but you came through in the end, and that's what matters. He nodded, tears in his eyes. You're stronger than I ever knew. As I zipped up my last suitcase, Alex popped her head in, ready to roll. College girl? I grinned. You bet. Let's blow this popsicle stand. As we loaded up the car, I couldn't help but feel grateful. It was weird, but this whole mess showed me who my real friends were and how strong I could be. You okay? Alex asked, noticing my thoughtful look. Yeah, just thinking. A year ago, I didn't think I had a future. Now, the sky's the limit. Dad gave me one last hug before we left. Show them what you're made of, kiddo. The story's over, but I have a question for you. If you were in my shoes, would you ever forgive your dad for choosing Veronica over you? Or is some betrayal too deep to move past? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to hear what you do in this situation. If you enjoyed this wild ride, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that'll make your jaw drop. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm just a regular 17-year-old, except for the fact that I've been dealing with a long-term illness that's really tough. It's been just me and my dad, Mark. Ever since my mom passed away when I was young, we've always been super close, and he's been my biggest support, especially with all the doctor visits and medication I need. Life was pretty calm until Veronica showed up. Dad met her at work, and she was super charming. At first, I was happy for Dad, he deserved some happiness, right? And Veronica seemed cool. She'd bring me little gifts and say things like, "Sarah, honey, how about a girls' night? We could do face masks and watch that rom-com you love." I thought it sounded great. That sounds awesome. Maybe we could order pizza too, I said. Of course, anything for my new daughter, she said with a wink, but something about that wink didn't feel right. Things moved quickly. Before I knew it, Dad was proposing to Veronica, and she was showing off a ring that could probably be seen from space. "Sarah, what do you think about having Veronica as your stepmom?" Dad asked, looking so hopeful. I forced a smile and said, "If she makes you happy, Dad, then I'm happy." The wedding was small, just close friends and family. Afterward, Veronica moved in, and I tried to get along with her. We'd have family dinners where she'd ask about school, but it always felt a bit strange. "So Sarah, how's that science project going?" she'd ask. "It's good, still working on the hypothesis." I'd reply, "Well, don't stress too much. It's not like you're curing cancer," she'd say with a laugh that didn't seem genuine. Then one night, I woke up with terrible pain. It was unbearable. "Dad, help," I managed to yell. Dad rushed into my room, looking panicked. "Sarah, what's wrong? Tell me," he said. "It hurts, Dad. It really hurts," I whimpered. Veronica was at the door and said, "Mark, maybe we should wait it out. Teenagers can be so dramatic." But Dad wasn't listening to her. He picked me up and rushed me to the car. As we drove to the hospital, I saw Veronica's reflection in the rearview mirror, and she looked annoyed, like I was bothering her. In the ER, while the doctors were running tests, I overheard Dad and Veronica talking outside my room. "Mark, these hospital bills are going to be huge. Are you sure this isn't just what? Veronica, our daughter is in pain. Nothing else matters right now," Dad replied. He said "our daughter," which should have made me feel good, but the way Veronica responded, "Sure, of course," gave me chills. As I lay there hooked up to machines, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated, and I was right. After that night, things only got worse. I was missing more school, and the treatments became even more intense. I overheard Dad and Veronica arguing in the kitchen. "Mark, these bills are insane. We can't keep doing this," Veronica said. "What do you want me to do, Veronica? She's my daughter," Dad shot back. "I'm just saying, maybe she's exaggerating a bit, for attention." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own stepmom thought I was faking it. I wanted to barge in and defend myself, but before I could, a sharp wave of pain hit me, and I collapsed to the floor. "Dad, help," I cried out. They both ran in, but the look on Veronica's face said it all. She seemed more annoyed than concerned. "Oh, Sarah, again? Don't you think you're being a bit dramatic?" she said in this sickly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. Dad looked torn. "Honey, are you sure you're not just stressed about school?" he asked. I couldn't believe it. "Are you kidding me? I can barely stand," I snapped. Just then, my best friend Alex showed up, perfect timing. "Holy crap, Sarah, what's going on?" Alex rushed over to me. Veronica waved her off. "She's fine, just a little overdramatic," she said, rolling her eyes, but Alex wasn't buying it. "She looks terrible. We need to call an ambulance now." "Let's not overreact," Veronica started, but Alex was already on the phone. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what I had been saying all along. My condition was serious, and I needed regular treatment. Dad looked guilty, but Veronica? She was putting on a show, acting like the perfect stepmom. "Oh, doctor, we've been so worried. Is there anything we can do to help our dear Sarah?" she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. The doctor didn't seem convinced. "Well, for starters, bringing her in when she's in pain would help," he said. I saw a flash of anger on Veronica's face, before she quickly forced another smile. Later that night, when they thought I was asleep, I overheard them talking in the hallway. "Mark, this is getting out of hand. These treatments, the hospital stays, we're going to go bankrupt, Veronica said. But the doctor said. Doctors say a lot of things, Mark. They're just trying to make money off us. Sarah's young, she'll bounce back. What she really needs is some tough love. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tough love? I was seriously ill, not acting out. I don't know, Veronica, what if? Trust me, Mark, I've dealt with kids before. Sometimes they need a push to get through things. If we stop the treatments, she'll have to face life head-on. She'll thank us later. There was a long pause, and my heart pounded so hard I thought they might hear it. Maybe you're right, we'll try it your way. It felt like a punch to the gut. My own dad, the one person I thought I could always rely on, was siding with Veronica. As they wheeled me out of the hospital the next day, I caught Veronica's eye. She gave me a smile that sent chills down my spine, like she was saying, I won. But you know what? Game on, Veronica. If she thought I was going down without a fight, she was wrong. I might be sick, but I wasn't stupid. There was no way I was going to let her win this twisted game. After Dad and Veronica stopped my treatments, things got really bad, really fast. I tried to tough it out, but it was rough. One morning, I could barely get out of bed. Sarah, get up, you'll be late for school. Veronica's shrill voice cut through the door. I don't feel good. I think I need to stay home, I said, weakly. She barged in, her eyes narrowed. Oh please, this act is getting old. Get dressed. I tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. As I stumbled down the stairs, Dad looked worried. Honey, are you okay? Maybe you should stay home. Veronica jumped in before I could respond. Mark, remember what we talked about, no more coddling. Dad's face hardened. Right, Sarah, toughen up, you can't miss any more school. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. At school, I pulled Alex aside. Dude, I need help. They've stopped my meds, my treatments, everything. Alex's eyes widened. What the hell? That's messed up. We've got to do something. I'm scared, Alex. What if they put me in foster care? Just then, Mrs. Rodriguez, my favorite teacher, overheard us. Sarah, Alex, is everything okay? Before I knew it, I was spilling everything in her classroom. Her face grew more horrified with every word. This is serious, Sarah, we need to get you help. But what can we do? It's my dad's word against mine, I said, feeling hopeless. Alex snapped her fingers. Evidence. We need proof. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. Good thinking, Alex. Sarah, can you secretly record what's happening at home? A glimmer of hope sparked inside me. Yeah, I think I can. For the next few weeks, I became a secret agent in my own house. I recorded Veronica's cruel comments, Dad ignoring my pain. It was hard listening to it all again, but I knew it was necessary. One day, I overheard Veronica on the phone while I was pretending to nap on the couch. Yes, I've transferred another $5,000. No, don't worry, Mark has no idea. He thinks it's all going to Sarah's treatments. My eyes shot open. She was stealing from us. I quickly hit record on my phone, praying she wouldn't notice. Of course, I'll be careful. These idiots suspect nothing. I'll have the account drained in no time. I felt sick, and not just because of my illness. How could Dad not see through her? The next day at school, I told Alex and Mrs. Rodriguez everything. She's stealing money too. This is insane. Alex was furious. Mrs. Rodriguez looked serious. I've contacted your previous doctors. They're appalled by the situation and are willing to provide statements. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Thanks, Mrs. R. I just hope it's enough. As we were planning our next move, a wave of dizziness hit me. The room started spinning. Sarah, you okay? Alex's voice sounded distant. I tried to respond, but my legs gave out. The last thing I heard was Mrs. Rodriguez yelling for someone to call 911. I woke up in the ER again. Dad was there, looking scared and confused. Veronica, as usual, was trying to charm the doctor. Oh, you know how teenagers are always so dramatic. I'm sure it's just stress from school, she said. The doctor wasn't having any of it. Mrs. Thompson, your stepdaughter's condition is extremely serious. Without proper treatment, she could. Now, let's not exaggerate. Mark and I know what's best for our Sarah, Veronica interrupted. I saw something change in Dad's face. It was like he was finally seeing Veronica for who she really was. But before he could say anything, I felt myself slipping away again. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I heard Alex's voice. "Don't worry, Sarah, we've got the evidence. We'll fix this, just hang on." I wanted to tell them everything, the stolen money, the lies, but the darkness pulled me under. My last thought was, please let this plan work. I can't take much more of this. When I woke up again, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Dad was by my side, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. There was no sign of Veronica. Guess she finally flew off on her broomstick. "Sarah, baby, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you," Dad said, his voice thick with regret. Before I could respond, the doctor stormed in, furious. "Mr. Thompson, your daughter's condition is critical. The lack of treatment is borderline criminal neglect. I'm obligated to report this to the authorities." Dad looked like he was about to faint. I didn't know," my wife said. That's when Alex and Mrs. Rodriguez burst in like they were leading a rescue mission. "We've got proof," Alex shouted, waving her phone. Mrs. Rodriguez, always the calm one, stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, Sarah's been documenting everything, the neglect, the verbal abuse, and the financial fraud." Dad's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "Financial fraud? What are you talking about?" Alex played the recordings on her phone. Veronica's voice filled the room, bragging about stealing money from the family accounts. Dad's face went from shocked to devastated. "I can't believe this. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool." Just then, a nurse rushed in. "There's been an accident. A woman named Veronica Thompson." My heart skipped a beat as Dad jumped up. "What happened?" "She was in a high-speed collision, apparently trying to leave town with a large sum of cash. She's alive, but she's paralyzed from the neck down." The room went dead silent. I couldn't help but think, karma's a real thing, isn't it? Dad looked pale, like he might be sick. "I need to go see her." "Dad, after everything she did?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I need to tell her it's over and that she's going to pay for what she did to you." As he left, Alex squeezed my hand. "We did it. Sarah, you're safe now." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My treatment started again, and slowly, I began to feel like myself. Dad filed for divorce faster than you could say gold digger, and the police were all over Veronica. A year later, I was packing for college, something I never thought I'd live to see. Dad knocked on my door. "Need any help, kiddo?" "Nah, I got it, thanks, though," I said. Things were still a bit awkward between us, but we were working on it, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. "Sarah, I know I've said it a million times, but I'm sorry. I should have believed you," Dad said, his voice heavy with regret. I sighed. "Dad, I get it. She played you, she played all of us, but in the end, you came through, and that's what matters." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "You're stronger than I ever knew." As I zipped up my last suitcase, Alex popped her head into the room. "Ready to roll, college girl?" I grinned. "You bet. Let's blow this popsicle stand." As we loaded up the car, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Strange, right? But this whole mess showed me who my real friends were and just how strong I could be. "You okay?" Alex asked, noticing my quiet moment. "Yeah, just thinking. A year ago, I didn't think I had a future. Now, sky's the limit," I said with a smile. Dad gave me one last hug before we took off. "You show them what you're made of, kiddo." As the story wraps up, I've got a question for you. If you were in my shoes, would you forgive your dad for choosing someone like Veronica over you? Or is that kind of betrayal too deep to get past? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to know what you do. If you enjoyed this wild ride, hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. I should never have married an old woman like you. Younger women are so much better. I can't even walk with you in public. You embarrass me. If I could, I'd go back and start my life over. These are the words my ex-husband, Tom, said to me 10 years ago. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm 48 years old. I married Tom when I was 33, and he was 5 years younger than me. I was a nurse, and we met at the hospital where I worked. Tom had just finished his residency and joined the hospital as a new doctor. He often asked me for help, and I found his innocence charming, so I supported him. Even though I was 5 years older and a nurse while he was a doctor, we eventually started dating because he kept talking to me every day, and I couldn't ignore him. After 2 years of dating, we got married. I was a little worried about the age difference, but Tom didn't seem to care, so I stopped worrying too. However, after 5 years of marriage, he began to insult me daily, saying he should have married someone younger. He would chat happily with younger nurses at the hospital, but I tried to ignore it since we were at work, and I didn't want to cause a scene. Then, one day, I found out Tom had been cheating on me. The other woman was a former patient, but I didn't know her because I worked in a different department. She was 10 years younger than me. Tom laughed and said, "It's no wonder we didn't have kids with someone old like you. My girlfriend is pregnant with my child." I couldn't stand to be with someone like Tom anymore, so I agreed to the divorce. I told him and his girlfriend that I would be asking for alimony, financial support. Tom got furious. "I was married to an old woman like you for 5 years, and you want alimony? I should be the one getting paid," he shouted. He didn't expect me to ask for money after his affair. Even Tom's father called me, saying it was normal for young men to be attracted to younger women. I was shocked. Tom refused to pay, so I had no choice but to get a lawyer. I couldn't just stay quiet after everything he did and said. The lawyer told me I had the right to ask for alimony, so I let them handle everything. I had heard that getting divorced is harder than getting married, and I truly felt that way. Thanks to the lawyer, I was able to move forward. I was able to get the alimony I deserved, end the lease on our shared apartment, and start living on my own. I also changed my last name from Evans back to my maiden name, Britton. The only good thing was that Tom switched to a new hospital. As his last remark, he said, "I wouldn't want to be stuck with a greedy old hag like you." He probably thought divorcing me for his mistress would upset people, but I was surprised he was already so prepared, with a new job lined up. Still, people talk. I couldn't escape the whispers about how I was dumped by my younger husband, and I felt like everyone was judging me. It made me paranoid, and the stress became too much. Eventually, I quit my job at the hospital. I spent some time feeling lost, but since I love working, I decided to find a new job. Luckily, I found a small maternity clinic nearby that was hiring nurses, and I got the job right away. It was a small, friendly place, with only a few doctors and nurses, but we all got along well. The patients and staff were kind, and my life started to feel peaceful again. My coworkers would say, "Miss Britton, you're so observant, and the patients really like you. We're lucky to have you." But my calm days didn't last. One day, a pregnant woman was referred to the clinic from another hospital. Her name was Sarah Evans, the same name as Tom's mistress. I checked, and sure enough, her husband was Tom Evans, a doctor. My ex-husband. Tom's hospital didn't have an obstetrics department, and they had just moved nearby, so they were referred to our clinic. Since I had changed back to my maiden name, Sarah didn't recognize me, and we had never met face to face. I couldn't believe I was running into them here, but I kept quiet. A few days later, Tom came to the clinic with his wife for her checkup. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. He hadn't expected to see me. I didn't want to see him either. "What are you doing here?" he asked, and his wife quickly realized who I was. She snapped, "Did you come here just to bother us?" I calmly replied, "Of course not. I work here. I had no idea you lived nearby." But Tom wouldn't listen and accused me of following them. "You're stalking us, aren't you? Trying to harass me?" "Don't be ridiculous," I said. "Why would I do that? You're just a greedy woman who squeezed money out of me after I left you for being old. Who knows what you'll do next?" he shouted. He said all of this in the examination room, and everyone heard. Now, everyone knew about my past with Tom, and I felt all their eyes on me. Even though I knew Tom was wrong, it was hard to face the situation. I felt really uncomfortable. "I'm scared. I feel like she's looking at me with bad intentions. What if something happens to my baby?" Tom's wife added to the drama, fake tears in her eyes. Tom then said firmly, "I don't know what she's capable of, so please keep her away from my wife." The doctor in charge asked me to leave the room. It wasn't because they suspected me, but it seemed like the only way to calm things down was for me to step out. I understood that patients come first, and I didn't want to stay either, but it still made me feel terrible. I started feeling uncomfortable around everyone, especially since I didn't want people to know the details of my divorce. To make things worse, Tom's wife kept coming back to the hospital and badmouthing me each time, although everyone knew I wasn't at fault. No one said anything because she was a pregnant patient and needed to be taken care of. They didn't want to stress her out or interfere in personal matters. This made things even harder for me, and I dreaded staying in that atmosphere. With more than 6 months until her due date, I couldn't imagine working there for that long under these conditions. Even though it was a good job, I decided to resign. The director seemed relieved, saying, "It's a shame, but there's nothing we can do." I felt like I was being punished even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Exhausted from everything, I didn't have the energy to look for a new hospital job, so I went back to my parents' home in the countryside. They welcomed me without asking questions. At first, I couldn't bring myself to do anything, but I soon felt guilty for just staying at home. So, I took a part-time job at a local supermarket. It was my first time working outside of a hospital, but it felt refreshing and gave me a much-needed change of pace. I loved being a nurse, but it came with the huge responsibility of caring for people's lives. There wasn't a single day I could relax. Being away from that pressure felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. 3 years after moving back home, the supermarket offered me a full-time position. My hard work had been noticed, and I was happy to accept the offer. 4 years later, a matchmaker approached me and asked, "Would you consider an arranged marriage?" Surprised, I said, "Excuse me?" The store manager, who suggested it, said, "I have the perfect person for you," but at 45, I had no plans of remarrying, so I politely declined. Still, the manager kept insisting. The other person was a 47-year-old divorcee like me, also divorced because of a cheating spouse. It happened to him 20 years ago. In the end, I couldn't say no to the meeting, and we agreed to meet in person, without any middleman. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already there. As I walked in, he quickly stood up and bowed deeply but accidentally hit his forehead on the table. Ouch! His face turned red, and I couldn't help but laugh. It felt like something straight out of a comedy. "Hi, I'm James. Thank you for coming today," he said. "Nice to meet you, I'm Elizabeth," I replied. Thanks to his funny little accident, we quickly felt comfortable with each other. As we talked, he told me that he had asked for this arranged meeting because he fell in love with me at first sight when he visited our supermarket during a business trip. It turned out the store manager was his old college senior, and he helped set up the meeting. "I'd like to have a serious relationship, if possible," he said. I had planned to refuse, but somehow I couldn't say those words. Instead, I found myself wanting to see him again. After dating for 6 months, we decided to get married. Both my parents liked him and were genuinely happy for us. Living with my husband, who always thought of me first, was a true blessing. Since we were both older, we didn't plan on having kids. We just wanted to enjoy a peaceful life together, hand in hand. However, when I turned 48, my health started to decline. I went to the hospital for a checkup, thinking I was sick, but the doctor told me I wasn't just ill, I was pregnant. I never imagined getting pregnant at this age, and I had assumed my symptoms were something else, not morning sickness. I think my husband was just as shocked. When I told him, "It seems like there's a baby," he responded naturally, "That's great. So, who's the lucky one? Do I know them?" I smiled and said, "Yeah, you know them very well, they're right in front of you." "What? I'm the one who's pregnant," I added. My husband looked confused and stayed quiet for a moment. I thought to myself. The man I was set to meet was a 47-year-old divorcee, just like me. He had gone through a divorce because his spouse had cheated on him, which happened 20 years ago. In the end, I couldn't say no, and we agreed to meet directly, without using any go-between. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already there. As I walked in, he quickly stood up and bowed, but accidentally hit his forehead on the table. Ouch! His face turned red, and I couldn't help but laugh. It was like something out of a comedy. "Hi, I'm James. Thank you for coming today," he said awkwardly. "Nice to meet you, I'm Elizabeth," I replied, still smiling. That little accident broke the ice, and we soon felt comfortable with each other. As we talked, I found out that this meeting happened because James had fallen in love with me at first sight when he visited the supermarket where I worked during a business trip. He had asked his old college friend, who was the store manager, to set up the meeting. "I'd like to have a serious relationship, if possible," he said. I had come with the idea of turning him down, but I couldn't bring myself to say no. Instead, I found myself wanting to see him again. After dating for 6 months, we decided to get married. My parents really liked him, and they were happy for us. Living with James, who always thought of me and cared for me, was a true blessing. Since we were both older, we didn't plan to have children. We just wanted to live a peaceful life together. But when I turned 48, my health started to get worse. I went to the hospital for a checkup, thinking I was sick, but to my surprise, I found out I was pregnant. I never thought I would get pregnant at this age, and I didn't realize my illness was actually morning sickness. I think my husband was just as shocked. When I told him, It seems like there's a baby. He smiled and said, "That's great. So, who's the lucky one? Do I know them?" I laughed and said, "Yes, you know them very well, they're standing right in front of you." "What? I'm the one who's pregnant," I explained. My husband looked confused and stayed quiet for a moment, clearly trying to process the news. "Since you're new to our hospital, you might not know, but I don't have any connection to you." "Even so, what you just said was terrible, Mrs. Miles pointed out. "I can't believe a doctor would say something like that." Just then, my husband arrived. "Sorry I'm late. My wife has been a great help to you," he said, noticing I was upset. Tom, looking pale, sensed something was wrong. "Is something wrong?" my husband asked. "I was just told by this man, Dr. Evans, that giving birth at 48 is disgusting," I explained. Hearing this, my usually calm husband's face changed instantly. He realized this was the same Dr. Evans, my ex-husband, that I had told him about. He knew Tom's name and occupation. "Are you Dr. Evans? Did you insult my wife?" my husband asked. Well that's..." Tom stammered. "What kind of hospital is this, where a doctor insults a patient? I can't trust my wife and unborn child to a place like this," my husband exclaimed. Just then, the nurse returned with the director. "I heard there was some rudeness," said the director. "My father recommended this hospital, but I can't believe a doctor like this works here. It seems we chose the wrong hospital," my husband said angrily. The director apologized. "I'm terribly sorry, that's not true. This man is not our doctor, I just fired him." "What?" Tom exclaimed. "I didn't know he was like this. I only hired him because a friend asked me to. We don't need a doctor who talks like that. He won't be here again," the director said firmly. Tom tried to protest, but the director silenced him. "Shut up and leave. Don't come near our hospital again." Tom was dragged out by another doctor, still shouting. The director apologized so much that we felt bad for him. We calmed down and sat back down, but my husband was still angry. "Did you fire him because my father donated to this hospital? If not, would you have let him stay?" The director shook his head. He explained that Tom had only been at the hospital for a week. Tom's father, who was an old classmate of the director, had begged him to give Tom a job. The director had no idea Tom would act like this and apologized again. "It's not like all the doctors here are like Tom. In fact, the obstetrician here is very good. If Tom wasn't around, I'd be happy to have the baby here," I said. My husband agreed. A few days later, Tom contacted us, begging for help. "Could you talk to the director and get me rehired? If you ask, they might reconsider," he pleaded. Apparently, Tom had been fired from many hospitals due to his bad attitude, and his father had warned him this was his last chance. My husband took the phone and told Tom that if he ever contacted us again, he would report him for harassment. After that, Tom never called again. Later, on the way home from the hospital, we saw Tom working at a convenience store. It seemed no hospital would hire him anymore. He told us his wife and child had left him, but I didn't feel any sympathy. We decided not to go to that convenience store again. The following year, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She is adorable, and no matter what, I'm determined to raise her with love and care. My husband has been smitten with her since the day she was born, and I have to make sure he doesn't spoil her too much. "If you're such a mess, there's no way you're my kid. Get lost, you pig," yelled Bob. Bob and I stepped in to protect Luke. "If you won't recognize Luke as your own son, I'll take him in." Days later, when they saw Luke on TV, they came to our house, saying, "Luke, come home with us." Luke asked, "Who are you guys?" "I'm Katherine Johnson. After my husband passed away a few years ago, I've been living alone in a big house, and it's been very lonely. My days were boring, except for one thing, seeing my grandson Luke. My son Bob and his wife Michelle run a nightclub that seems to be doing well. They're always busy. After several years of marriage, they had a baby. They were hoping for a girl to become a star at their club, so they bought lots of baby girl stuff, but the baby was a boy, which was a huge disappointment for them. You'd think they'd love the baby anyway, but that wasn't the case. Bob and Michelle showed no interest in him and didn't even care about his name. I suggested a few names, and they picked Luke. Bob and Michelle kept ignoring Luke, hoping for a girl next time, but they never had another child. Michelle grew to resent Luke, blaming him for their failed plans, saying things like, "Our plans are ruined because you're not a girl, it's all your fault." Michelle and Bob started treating Luke with increasing coldness. I wish I had stepped in earlier. maybe things wouldn't have turned out so badly. Eventually, Michelle stopped cooking for Luke and instead left a $5 bill on the table each day before going to work, not returning until early morning. Luke was left alone from evening until night, waiting for his parents to come home. Imagine how scary and lonely that must have been for a young child. With the money Michelle left, Luke bought his meals at the convenience store. Being a child, he didn't think about balanced nutrition and often chose sweets and potato chips. Sometimes he ate food that was about to be thrown away. A kind store worker noticed Luke's situation and occasionally shared extra food with him, so even on days when Michelle didn't leave money, Luke didn't go hungry. By the time Luke was in 3rd grade, he weighed over 150 pounds due to his unhealthy diet of sweets and convenience store food. Bob and Michelle were unhappy about this. They started being verbally abusive, calling him names and telling him he was a burden. They said things like, "Look at how fat you've gotten. You're not my child. You're just a fat burden. Get out." Hearing this broke my heart. I worried about how Luke felt hearing such things from his own father. I visited their house occasionally to check on him. From their tone, I could tell Bob and Michelle were growing more resentful of Luke. One day, I went to their house to see if they were mistreating Luke. As soon as I opened the door, I heard Bob yelling, "There's no way a fat kid like you could be my child. Get lost, you pig." I rushed towards the noise and found Luke lying on the floor, with his hand on his cheek, suggesting Bob had hit him. I quickly moved to protect Luke from Bob. Luke looked up at me with a vacant, resigned expression, which made me regret that such a young boy had to endure such pain. Bob seemed oblivious to my arrival, his eyes wide with shock. "Do you even understand what you're saying?" I shouted at Bob. "Luke is genuinely your child." Even though Bob is my son, I couldn't understand his thoughts at all. I couldn't believe he was treating his own innocent son so poorly just because Luke wasn't the daughter he wanted. "If you won't recognize Luke as your child, I'll take him in," I said firmly. Both Luke and Bob were taken aback by my sudden decision. Bob and Michelle, seeing this as a chance to get rid of their problem, eagerly accepted my offer. "Thanks, Mom, now I can focus on my business," Bob said. "Thank you so much," Michelle added with a smile that seemed a bit too bright. Their cheerful faces made me sad because it was clear how little they cared about Luke. I had thought it was best for Luke to be with his real parents, but I deeply regretted not taking him in sooner. On the way back to my house, Luke said, "I'm sorry, I'll grow up quickly and move out." I was confused by his words and asked him what he meant. Luke replied with a serious expression, "You regret taking me in on a whim, don't you? You look angry." Seeing Luke's worried face, I reassured him, "No, I regret not doing this sooner. I should have realized that you'd be better off with me rather than staying with them." "Are you annoyed with me?" Luke asked, looking anxious. I hugged him tightly and said, "No way, I love you more than they ever could." Luke seemed unsure how to react. He stood still for a moment, then softly said, "This is the first time I've been hugged." Tears filled my eyes, and I vowed to make him happy no matter what. From that day on, Luke changed. He became lively, cheerful, and more talkative. Every day when he came home from school, he eagerly helped prepare dinner and excitedly shared stories about his day. "You seem very cheerful today. Did something good happen?" I asked him. "Do you know something funny happened today?" Luke told me. While we were singing in music class, a sparrow flew into the room. The teacher panicked and almost started crying, saying she couldn't handle birds. Luke chuckled as he remembered the story, and his cute, lovable smile made my heart melt. Since Luke started eating healthier meals at my place, he's become more fit, though he still has his childlike charm. He's grown into a handsome young boy. He shyly mentioned that the girls at school have started talking to him more, and it was clear he was happy. I was relieved to see him so content. The day of the first parent-teacher conference after Luke came to live with me arrived. The teacher suggested, "Why don't you have him take an IQ test at the hospital?" I was anxious at first, worried they were hinting something was wrong with Luke's intelligence. "Is Luke falling behind?" I asked. The teacher quickly reassured me, "No, it's actually the opposite. Based on my experience, I believe Luke might be gifted." I was unfamiliar with the term gifted. The teacher explained that it refers to children who have higher abilities compared to their peers. He handed me a graph showing Luke's grades. The graph revealed a sharp upward trend in his performance, particularly right after he moved in with me. Surprised by the sudden improvement, I asked Luke, "Have you started going to cram school or something?" Luke shook his head and said, "No, I just started doing well in tests normally. Before, I'd intentionally leave answers blank or get them wrong to avoid drawing attention. At my old home, if they saw I was doing well, they didn't like it and would hit me more. So, I'd make it look like I didn't know the answers, even though I did. Luke shrugged and smiled smugly. Now that I don't have to do that, I just take the tests normally. It's so easy, it's boring. Even reading the textbooks makes everything clear in class. And I want to study something more challenging. I looked at Luke with concern, worried that the teacher might be offended by what he said. But my fears were quickly put to rest when I heard the teacher laughing heartily. If Luke is gifted, we might be able to provide support that suits him, the teacher said. Why not get him tested at the hospital? With that in mind, I decided to take Luke to the hospital over the weekend. Based on his behavior at school and home, as well as the results of his IQ test, it seemed Luke might indeed be gifted. The doctor confirmed this, noting that Luke's IQ was significantly higher than average. I was surprised by how smart Luke was. It explained why he found school so easy. To help him with more challenging studies, I decided to hire a private tutor. The tutor, a seasoned professional who graduated from a prestigious American university, understood Luke's needs well. Luke was thrilled with the private tutoring, finding it more engaging than school. He excelled in both English and Chinese proficiency tests, earning top grades. The tutor proudly shared about his exceptional student on social media, and soon Luke became the talk of the town, with newspapers and TV stations requesting interviews. One day, while I was spending time with Luke, the doorbell rang. I expected reporters, but was surprised to find Bob and Michelle standing at the door. "Long time no see, Mom, we've come to get Luke," Bob said. I was taken aback. "What are you doing here? Luke has an interview soon. I'm very busy, please leave." When Bob and Michelle heard about the interview, their faces lit up. "So it's really Luke on TV? Our son is truly remarkable." They were visibly excited. Bob and Michelle exchanged eager looks and then excitedly shared their plan. "If Luke comes back, our shop will be secure," Bob said. Michelle nodded vigorously in agreement. "If we get customers coming in to see Luke, our sales will go up. In the long run, we could even let him manage things for us. It would make our lives so much easier," Bob and Michelle said. I was stunned by their selfishness. After rejecting Luke as their child, they showed up to take him back now that they realized how talented he is. A child isn't a possession to be used for personal gain. Don't they understand that? My patience was running thin, and I was ready to confront them when Luke appeared behind me. Seeing Luke, Bob and Michelle broke into smiles, which only added to my irritation, but their smiles were quickly shattered by Luke's words. "Who are you guys?" Luke asked, staring at them directly. They looked confused. "We're your dad and mom. You're our beloved child, whom we suffered to bring into this world," Michelle said. Her claim made me sick. How dare she call him her beloved child? Just as I was about to respond, Luke smirked and said, "My only family here is my grandmother. I don't know you people who abandoned me." "Luke, that woman is your grandmother, not your mother. Come back home with us," Bob said, trying to persuade him gently. Luke glared at him. "My home is here with my grandma. Unlike you, she's always shown me love. You abandoned me, and now you want me back because you think I'm useful. You're not my parents." It was the first time Luke had ever raised his voice like that. Bob and Michelle flinched at his outburst. Bob, visibly irritated, tried to grab Luke's arm. Just as I was about to intervene, a voice called out from behind Bob, "Is what he said true? Did you abandon him?" Journalists had started to gather, their faces serious, as it was time for the scheduled interview. The reporters surrounded Bob and Michelle, bombarding them with questions. The interview was later broadcast on television with the sensational title, "The Tragic Past of a Genius Boy and the Parents Who Abandoned Him." The impact was huge. Bob and Michelle faced backlash on social media and received countless angry calls. People were outraged, asking how they could abandon a child just because he wasn't a girl and accusing them of manipulating him for their own convenience. Crowds gathered to see the faces of these terrible parents, and their business suffered greatly. In desperation, Michelle reached out to her own parents for help but received a cold response. "You reap what you sow. Deal with it yourself. We have no intention of helping anyone who abandoned their child." Bob and Michelle were widely scorned and abandoned. They reportedly cried out in frustration, "Why is this happening to us?" I hoped this would be a wake-up call for them, though their attitude suggested otherwise. After the incident, Luke and I decided to move far away to cut ties with them completely. I respected Luke's wish to sever all connections, and we relocated to prevent them from approaching him again. We would have sought legal measures if possible, but it's difficult to sever ties with biological parents, even if they are adoptive. At Luke's new school, he made a good friend who seemed to understand him well. Luke would bring him home, show him his homemade programming projects, and excitedly explain his interests. While I found some of Luke's interests hard to follow, his friend listened attentively and nodded along. They often became engrossed in discussions about programming. Seeing Luke so happy and engaged made me feel glad we moved. Thanks to his new friend, Luke has been able to live freely and happily every day. I hope they continue to support and enjoy each other's company. Without much of a greeting, I start cleaning up. Seeing this, my ex-husband James finally speaks up. "You're not even going to cry, huh?" he says, surprised. I guess he expected me to resist and break down when he asked for a divorce, but honestly, I always thought he was full of himself. He wasn't the only one who had fallen out of love. "Well, you're the one who's going to have a harder time after the divorce, not me," James said, trying to sound confident. Instead of crying, I could barely hold back my laughter. "Huh? What do you mean?" James asked, looking confused. "Between a housewife like you, Kate, and a big shot like me, you're going to struggle. I'm planning to remarry soon, while you'll be all alone," he smirked, feeling sure of himself. "In normal situations, maybe you'd be right, but I know about Emma, the woman you're cheating with. She's not exactly great, is she?" "What? How do you know her name?" James looked shocked. "I'm Kate, a 32-year-old housewife. I met my husband James at a social gathering because we were the same age and had a lot in common. We quickly became good friends, and soon after, we got married." James worked in sales at a trading company and made good money. Thanks to him, I lived a comfortable life without any financial struggles. But there was one big problem: our marriage wasn't going well. It had already been 7 years since we got married. In the beginning, we were in love, always spending time together and sharing meals, no matter how busy James was. But that closeness faded away over time. "Take care," I said one evening. "What about dinner?" "I don't need it. I'll eat out. You can go to bed first. I'll be home late," he replied. "All right, got it," I said, feeling the distance between us. When we were newlyweds, James used to say, "Eating with you, Kate, is the best part of my day," but now, he often came home after midnight, long after I was asleep. He left for work in the morning without talking to me, making me feel like he was avoiding me like a moody teenager. Around that time, I noticed James had started acting differently. Did he always use this hair product? I wondered. Suddenly, there was a whole line of skincare products and cologne in the bathroom. James never used to care about his appearance. He didn't even own many casual clothes, just suits. But now, he was spending money on branded outfits. At first, I thought maybe he was just going through a change. He never cared about his looks, so I didn't mind. But something felt off. His behavior became suspicious. He started using his phone in secret and even took it with him to the bathroom and shower. He used to leave it lying around carelessly, and I'd almost sit on it. Why had he changed so much? I began to suspect he was cheating on me. He was coming home late more often, and I had a bad feeling, but without any real proof. I tried to push those thoughts away. Despite the coldness in our marriage, I still wanted to believe in James deep down. The thought of him cheating scared me. So, instead of facing the truth, I tried to work on our relationship, pretending everything was fine. I tried to talk to James more and suggested we go out together, but every time I approached him, he brushed me off. I guess it made sense. After 7 years of marriage, our relationship had become almost fake. Even though I was trying, his coldness left me feeling incredibly lonely. As things went on like this, I started to feel worn out. One night, I couldn't hold back any longer and finally decided to ask him directly. "Hey, you're not cheating, are you?" James just looked at me and stayed silent. "Say something, are you cheating or not?" After a long pause, without a word, he stood up from the couch and walked over to where I was sitting at the table. Then, he bowed his head and said, "I'm sorry, Kate, I want a divorce." I was speechless. I never expected him to say that, but he continued, ignoring my silence. "I've fallen in love with another woman. I want to start a new life with her." How could he say something so selfish, so easily? What about our 7 years together? I had suspected there might be another woman, but I never thought he would say it so bluntly. All my efforts to fix our relationship suddenly felt pointless. Was the man I fell in love with really this heartless? When we first met, I thought he was the most wonderful person in the world. Now, I couldn't even speak. My mind was spinning with thoughts. And then James said something that made me question if I'd heard him right. The truth is, she's pregnant with my child. I want to be with her for our baby's future. I felt like I was going to collapse. Everything around me seemed to blur. In our 7 years together, we never had a child, even though we weren't using protection. In fact, we had been actively trying to conceive and even went through fertility treatments. Despite everything, we weren't able to have a child. According to the doctors, James had fertility issues, but he always said he really wanted a baby. Even though we knew it would be difficult, we kept trying. I always did my best to meet his expectations. Recently, though, our relationship had lost its spark, and we had stopped trying. Now, it seems the fact that he had a child with his mistress was a big reason for him wanting a divorce. I've always wanted a child, and I want my mom to see her grandchild as soon as possible. You understand, don't you, Kate? Please let me go. Let's get a divorce. His mother had been seriously ill and in the hospital for the past 2 years, so I understood why he wanted her to hold a grandchild, but to have a child with another woman, instead of with me? How awful could he be? I wanted a child too. That's why I went through fertility treatments. I thought we were both dealing with the pain of not being able to have kids. Do you realize how selfish you're being? You betrayed me, I yelled at him, angry, but James just looked down and apologized, like he was waiting for me to calm down. It made me even more upset. What kind of woman is she? Just because she's having your baby, I'm not ready to accept this divorce. I pressed him to tell me more about her, but he said, I'm sorry, but I want to respect her privacy. How can you be so selfish? I'm your wife. I have a right to know, I demanded, but even as I kept asking, James wouldn't tell me anything about her. All he said was, she's 2 years younger than you, Kate. That's it. She's an employee? What a joke. I thought, he must really care about her. No matter how much I pushed James, he didn't give me any real details. 4 days, we kept discussing the situation, but I refused to agree to the divorce. I didn't want things to go his way so easily. Throughout it all, James kept bowing his head, saying, I beg you, I don't have feelings for you anymore. What's the point in staying married? Even my mother knows about this, and she's okay with it. Hearing that he had already talked to my mother-in-law shook me. We hadn't been as close lately, but I thought we still had a good relationship. Then James dropped one bombshell after another. I've already given her an engagement ring. We're planning to move in together soon. The only thing left is for us to get divorced. I felt dizzy, like I might faint. James was really serious about being with the woman he was cheating with, but I still didn't agree to the divorce. This back and forth between us dragged on for almost a month. Finally, James lost his patience. One day, he got down on his knees and begged. I can't take it anymore. Just accept the divorce already. Our relationship has been broken for a long time. There's no point in keeping this going. Please, just let me go. He was literally on the floor, rubbing his forehead against it, begging me to let him go. After holding out for nearly a month, I started to wonder if it was time to accept the divorce. She's an employee? What a joke, I thought. He must really care about her. No matter how much I pushed for answers, James wouldn't give me any real details. 4 days, we kept talking about it, but I refused to agree to the divorce. I didn't want everything to go exactly as he planned. Meanwhile, James kept pleading with me, bowing his head and saying, I beg you, Kate, I don't love you anymore. What's the point of staying married? Even my mom knows, and she's okay with it. That last part shook me. He had already talked to my mother-in-law about the situation. We hadn't been as close recently, but I still thought we had a good relationship. Then James dropped even more shocking news. I've already given her an engagement ring. We're planning to move in together soon. All that's left is for you to agree to the divorce. I felt lightheaded, like I might pass out. My husband was seriously planning a future with the woman he was having an affair with, but I still didn't agree to divorce him. This back and forth went on for almost a month. Finally, James lost his patience. One day, he dropped to his knees and begged. I can't take this anymore. Just accept the divorce. Our relationship has been broken for a long time. There's no point in dragging this out. Please, just let me go. He was on the floor, head down, pleading with me. After holding out for nearly a month, I started to wonder if maybe it was time to let go. James's face turned pale within a few weeks after I gathered a lot of information about his mistress. First, her name is Emma. She's 27 years old and has been divorced twice. Currently, she's living with her parents. From what I learned, Emma has a bad reputation. She's known for jumping from one man to another. Even though she has a child with her first husband, he has custody, and she's been banned from seeing the child because she's considered a bad influence. On top of that, Emma isn't faithful. She's been seeing other men, even while involved with James. The private investigator I hired even saw her going into a motel with other men. I made sure to have photos taken as proof. When I showed all of this to James, along with the pictures, he collapsed. No way, Emma can't be that kind of woman. She only loved me. We were planning to start a family. James seemed deeply in love with Emma, and it was frustrating to watch. She didn't stand out in terms of looks, but she clearly knew how to charm men. This is a lie. You're just trying to shake me up. These pictures must be fake, James protested. Believe it or not, that's up to you, I said, but your mistress, oh, sorry, your new wife, has been seeing other men. Maybe the child isn't even yours. James's face grew even paler. No way, not Emma. The private investigator found this information. James, the chances are high that she's using you. Maybe you're just the one with the most money, and that's why she chose you to marry. Even if the child isn't yours, you wanted one so badly, right? Good luck raising it. That was the final blow. I packed my things and left the apartment. A while later, I got an email from James. He wanted to get back together. As I had suspected, the child Emma gave birth to wasn't James's. When he confronted her, she admitted, I didn't know whose child it was until after it was born. But since they were already married, James was legally responsible for the child. Emma had only used him for his money. As proof, James had even paid her share of the alimony, giving me a total of $80,000. James was furious and confronted Emma, but she just said, you seemed happy to take care of me. Then one day, she left the child behind and disappeared. James called me, begging for forgiveness. You were right, I was deceived. I'm so sorry, can we start over? I was disgusted. Do you think I'll come back just because you're saying all these nice things? You had an affair, that's a fact. You betrayed me. Accept the reality. I hung up after that. Later, I heard from a mutual friend that James handed the child Emma abandoned over to her parents, telling them to take responsibility, but her parents didn't want the trouble and told him to raise the child. James refused, saying, I have no obligation to raise a child that's not mine. He even submitted DNA test results to prove the child wasn't his, and revoked his acknowledgement of the child. Emma's parents had no idea the child wasn't James's. After they found her, they took her back home and are now forcing her to raise the child, keeping her under close watch to prevent her from seeing other men freely. Even though James is no longer connected to Emma, he ended up paying me $80,000 in alimony, including the portion that covered Emma. This wiped out his savings. He's been demanding that Emma repay the money he paid for her, but she doesn't care and claims she can't repay what she doesn't have. As a result, James has become a divorced man with no savings. He's struggling to focus at work, making lots of mistakes, and was eventually transferred to a department in a rural area with no chances of promotion. Now, he lives a lonely and isolated life. Meanwhile, I moved back to my parents' house and started helping with their farming business. A few years later, I met and fell in love with a local fisherman, and we got married. We don't have children, but I'm living a happy life with my husband, who is always kind to me. We'll fire anyone who can't meet their quotas, the young section chief said, eager to scold me. I couldn't meet my sales quota this month, so I bowed my head and said, I understand, I'll resign. I was pushed to my limit mentally and physically, so I decided to leave the company. Oh, you're really quitting? It'll be tough for an old man like you to lose your job, the section chief mocked me. The day after I left, I got a call from a former team member on my phone. What's going on? I asked. It's bad, please come back, Mr. Watson, they said. Ever since I left, our clients had been calling nonstop, upset about my departure. Eventually, even the section chief had to bow and apologize to me. My name is Benjamin Watson. I lost my father to illness when I was a child. I'm sorry for always making you feel lonely, I told my mom. It's okay, she said. She raised me all by herself with no relatives nearby, working hard from morning until night. I wanted to help her, so I decided to start working as soon as I finished high school. I'm sorry I've caused you so much trouble, I told my mom. It's okay, just leave it to me, she replied, but finding a job was difficult. I was rejected from several places and was unemployed for a month. Finally, one insurance company gave me a chance for a sales job. I was nervous, because I knew the job would be tough with strict quotas, but I wanted to help my mom. So I went to the interview, determined to get the job. Whether they liked my enthusiasm or just needed staff, they hired me on the spot. 35 years later, I'm still working as a salesperson handling corporate clients. My monthly sales barely meet the quota, and I'm not on track for promotion, but my dedication has earned me the trust of my clients. Can I ask you about insurance? A client would say. Of course. Can I visit you this afternoon? I'd reply. Even on my days off, if someone called, I'd go to them to help ease their concerns. Mr. Watson, are you taking enough time off? Someone asked me. Huh? Well, yeah, I replied. You say that, but you probably aren't, they said. It's unfair that clients get time off, but salespeople don't. But I wanted to help others, so I didn't mind. I often received thanks from my clients, and it kept me going. Thank you for coming right away when I call. No problem, call me anytime, I'd say. However, my boss didn't like the way I worked. You're proud of selling such cheap insurance, aren't you? He said. Proud? I didn't mean to be, but every policy is important when it helps the client, I replied. I confidently responded to Section Chief Howard, even though he clearly didn't like me. Howard had recently been transferred from headquarters to our sales department. Unlike me, who only finished high school, Howard was an elite graduate from a well-known university. It was obvious that the head office had high hopes for him, as he had already become a section chief, even though he was nearly 20 years younger than me. Do you think you're better just because you've worked for over 30 years and still haven't been promoted? Howard sneered at me. From his point of view, I seemed incompetent, and looking at my low sales numbers, I couldn't really argue. As part of my team, you're causing me problems if you don't bring in strong results, he added. It was clear Howard wanted to use this position to climb higher in the company, and he was very ambitious. While there was nothing wrong with his enthusiasm, I just couldn't agree with his approach. Listen up, everyone. Selling cheap products to small businesses won't get us anywhere. Go after the big clients and sell them our best, top-tier products, Howard said, rallying the younger salespeople and sending them out. His strategy was to sell the most expensive insurance to large clients, pushing policies with the highest premiums, but I didn't agree with this method. The insurance Howard promoted covered many things and could prepare clients for all sorts of risks. However, the more coverage they had, the higher the cost, and I didn't think this was fair. Insurance should protect people without becoming a heavy financial burden, and often, it included things the client didn't really need. Howard would say, think of the worst-case scenario, stir up their anxiety, and make them feel like they need the insurance. That's what sales skill is all about. To me, this approach was ridiculous and didn't feel right. I believe in offering insurance that fits each company's needs, no matter their size. I take the time to listen to them carefully, which often means working late every day, but I feel it's necessary to ensure they understand everything. However, Section Chief Howard didn't agree with this approach. Your way of working is inefficient. Sell faster and make more money, he said. I apologized, but continued doing things my way, even though I knew I was going against my boss. Still, I wasn't entirely sure if my way was the right one. Are you even listening to me? Howard snapped. Huh? What did you say? I was so worn out from work that I had been neglecting my family too, coming home late every night. I barely spent any time with them. When I was home, I was always too tired to really pay attention to my wife. I just want to spend more time with you, she said. I'm sorry, I'm just exhausted from work. You should rest on your days off. I'm worried about your health, she replied, clearly unhappy with the little time we had together as a family. Even though I was working for their sake, my family was becoming frustrated with me. It made me wonder if what I was doing was really okay. Then, my approach started to fall apart. Oh, look at that. You couldn't meet your quota, Howard mocked. I'm very sorry, I said, desperately apologizing for not hitting my sales numbers that month. He used the chance to scold me further. Mr. Watson, do you think you can make up for it next month? Section Chief Howard asked. I hesitated. If I didn't meet the quota this month, the shortfall would roll over to next month. Since I was barely meeting the current quota, the chances of catching up seemed slim. If you can't, maybe you should consider going part-time, Howard suggested with a smirk. Part-time? Is that even possible for a salesperson? I thought, confused. If you don't want that, then you're fired, Howard added. Fired? The word surprisingly didn't hit as hard as I expected. While I couldn't say I had no regrets about the job, I had been sacrificing so much, including my family time. Maybe it was time to accept being fired and focus on the family moments I'd missed. I pictured my wife's face and made my decision. Understood, I'll resign. Oh my, really quitting? It's going to be tough for an old man like you to lose your job, Howard taunted, but I just bowed my head and returned to my desk. After working here since high school, I knew I'd have to hand over my tasks. I started the resignation process that day. For the first time in ages, I came home on time. When I opened the door, my wife greeted me with a surprised look. At first, she seemed puzzled, but then she smiled. "You're home early today, dinner's not ready yet. Can you wait?" she said. "Thank you," I replied. For the first time since we got married, I really watched her cooking, realizing how much time work had taken away from me. "I've decided to quit my job," I told her. "I see," she replied without asking for details. The next day, I submitted my resignation to Section Chief Howard, who seemed pleased. "Please finish the handover quickly," he said with a broad smile. I cleaned up my desk and explained my duties to the person taking over. Until I officially left, I visited clients with my replacement. "Mr. Watson, you're quitting?" many clients asked, trying to persuade me to stay. I politely said my goodbyes, and a month later, I left the company. It was sad to leave a place I had worked for so long, but my heart felt lighter. Surprisingly, my wife seemed to be in a good mood, even though I was now unemployed. "You're not worried that I don't have a job anymore?" I asked. "Not at all. I was more worried that you were working too hard and might collapse one day," she replied. My wife had always been concerned about me because of how much I worked. "You've worked so hard for so long. It's okay to take a break now," she added. "Thanks for always worrying about me. How about we take a trip? We've got plenty of time now," I suggested. "That sounds wonderful. Let's go to a hot spring and relax from all those years of stress," she said, excited. The next day, we set off for a hot spring trip. While I was enjoying the time with my wife, I got a call from a former team member. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's terrible, Mr. Watson. Please come back," he said, sounding panicked. He explained that ever since I quit, the company had been getting non-stop calls from clients who wanted to cancel their contracts. The situation had gotten so bad that it was disrupting their work. "Not only are the calls overwhelming, but if we lose all these contracts, the company is going to be in big trouble. Can you please come back?" he begged. "I'm not coming back," I replied. "What?" he exclaimed. "Just handle each client with care and sincerity. That's all you need to do," I said before hanging up and turning off my phone. My wife, who had been watching, looked confused. "What happened?" she asked. "My former team member asked me to come back to work," I explained. "So, they finally realized how valuable you were, huh?" she said, smiling. Although I missed my work, I knew that if I went back, I wouldn't be able to enjoy these moments with my wife. Seeing her so happy made me realize it was worth staying away from work. After that, I blocked any more calls from my former colleagues and focused on enjoying our trip. While we were out for a walk, my wife invited me to an old-fashioned cafe. "This place is lovely. I've always wanted to come here," she said. "You really know your cafes," I remarked. At my comment, she looked a little sad, and I wondered if I had said something wrong. "You know, visiting cafes is my hobby," she said quietly. "Oh, I didn't know that," I admitted. "Yeah, cafes are trendy and have cute food. Lots of women enjoy them," she said with a smile. "I'm actually a certified barista, did you know?" "Wow, that's amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. I remembered my wife mentioning before that visiting cafes was her hobby and that she had a barista certification. Her voice became a little sad, and I felt a pang of guilt. When I was working, I had been too tired to really listen to her stories. "It's okay," she said. "When we get home, I'll make you some of my special coffee." True to her word, after we returned from our trip, she made me a cup of coffee. It was completely different from the instant coffee I was used to. "This is delicious. I can't believe I get to drink this at home," I said, amazed. "I'll make it for you anytime," she smiled. From that day on, my mornings began with the coffee my wife brewed for me. As I spent more time with her and my family, I realized there was so much I didn't know. Regretting how much I had neglected them, I decided to make family time a priority from now on. I used to work for a company, but now I'm excited to start something new. no matter how old you get. Starting fresh can be nerve-wracking, but I knew I'd be fine with my wife by my side. Together, we opened a small cafe. When I was unemployed, my wife shared a little dream with me. I want to work in a cafe I love, living a relaxed life in our old age. So, we took my resignation as a chance to chase her dream together. At first, the customers were mostly her friends, but word spread, and now our business is thriving. With my sales experience, I was good at serving customers, and my wife enjoyed chatting with friends while working. She always seemed so happy. "Welcome," I said to a customer one day, only to be surprised when I saw it was Chief Howard. His eyes widened when he saw me. I smiled and led him to a seat. "Is this your new job?" he asked. "Yes, I started it with my wife," I replied. It looked like Chief Howard was in the middle of his workday and had decided to stop by. He used to stay at the office, but it seemed like he had been visiting clients more since I left. "You look really happy now, Mr. Watson," he remarked. "Do I? Maybe," I said. It made me realize how tired I had always been at the company, especially since I hadn't been able to spend much time with my wife. Now, I could enjoy work and time with her. "You seem to be having fun," I told him, noticing that he looked more energized than before. "I'm trying to be more like you, Mr. Watson. You're my goal," he said. Then, checking his watch, he stood up. "I'll bring the whole team next time. Thanks for the meal," he added before leaving, looking lighter on his feet. I believe Chief Howard will continue to grow from here. Later, my wife called out, "I made coffee." "Thanks," I said. After closing the cafe, we sat side by side at the counter, sipping the coffee she brewed. It had been another busy day, but it was enjoyable. Sitting there with my wife, talking about the day, felt calm and special. "Thank you for everything," I said. "Why so formal all of a sudden?" she laughed. I smiled, realizing how much these moments meant to me. From now on, I would treasure every one of them. "My name is Louise, and I'm turning 34 this year. After college, I started working at a big company that most people know about. The pay was good, even for beginners, but it came with some downsides. I had to travel a lot for work and often worked extra hours and on holidays. It was tough, but I felt it was worth it. By the time I was 28, I got promoted to department head, which was unusual for a woman. 4 years ago, I married my boyfriend Brian. We had met through a friend. I wasn't really interested in dating, but my friend thought I should meet him. I wasn't eager to get married, thinking I could be happy single. Brian, on the other hand, wanted to get married and have kids soon. I wasn't ready for that and thought it was strange to get married when we didn't know each other well, especially since I was focusing on my career. When Brian brought up marriage, I would say we needed more time. He suggested we could marry after dating for 2 years, thinking that would give us enough time to get to know each other. Surprisingly, we did stay together for 2 years and then got married. During our relationship, Brian was loyal, not a gambler, and generally kind. He was hardworking, but his big ego sometimes bothered me. For example, he would complain at home if a senior at work gave him feedback, even though it was clear he had made mistakes. He didn't handle criticism well. When it came time for us to have dinner with both families, Brian chose an expensive restaurant that cost over $200 per person. He asked me to pay half of the total bill. I suggested a cheaper place, but Brian insisted that the expensive restaurant was important. He said if we went somewhere cheaper, it would make him look stingy. He couldn't afford to cover the whole bill, so he asked me to pay more than half, which I wasn't happy about. We had 4 people from each family, making a total of 8. Brian chose a restaurant that cost over $200 per person, even though he couldn't afford to cover his family's share. I wasn't thrilled about his choice and was even more confused when he told everyone at the dinner not to worry about the bill because he'd take care of it. Everyone seemed happy, so I decided to let him handle it, though I was unsure about it at the time. Looking back, I regret not reconsidering the marriage. After we got married, Brian's attitude changed. He started talking down to me and stopped helping with household chores, even though he had promised to. He began making excuses like, "What will the neighbors think if they see a man doing laundry? Chores are a woman's job." He insisted on relaxing at home while I did all the work. What really upset me was that Brian was constantly sending money to his parents. They were struggling with farming, and since they were nearing their 70s, it was getting harder for them to make a living. At first, I understood why he was helping them, but within 6 months of our marriage, it became a regular strain. Brian started giving all his salary to his parents and wouldn't contribute any money for our living expenses. I told him it was ridiculous to expect me to cover everything with my salary alone. He responded by saying, "How can you say that when my family is in trouble? They're your family too. Besides, you make more money than I do, so you should manage just fine." On the phone with his parents, Brian always said, "Don't worry, I'm taking care of everything with my salary. I won't let her complain about it." It seemed like he was sending just part of his salary, but in reality, he was giving all of it to his parents. He had no money left for himself and started asking me for pocket money, saying, "Can you give me about $200? I can't even afford lunch." I decided I couldn't keep living like this and suggested setting a monthly limit on how much we send to his parents. I told him he needed to figure out how to cover his lunch expenses on his own. Brian agreed, but he continued sending his entire salary to his parents. That was something I couldn't tolerate. One day, I had to be away for a business trip for about 2 weeks. Brian complained, "What am I going to eat while you're gone? And what about my laundry?" Despite knowing my job required frequent travel, I was frustrated by his childishness and told him to figure it out himself. I suggested he could go stay with his family if he needed help. Brian reluctantly agreed. When I returned home 2 weeks later, I found Brian's sister, Elizabeth, at our house. She lived a bit further away, and we hadn't seen each other since our wedding. I was curious about her presence. When I got home, Elizabeth greeted me with a big smile, saying, "Hi Louise, it's been a while. Oh, and the money, you were a lifesaver. Thank you so much." She was so cheerful that I didn't even have time to unpack my luggage before asking her, "Money? What are you talking about?" Elizabeth replied without hesitation, "Brian said since you have some savings, he'd use them as startup capital for my business. He mentioned that you had at least $1 million saved up." Just then, Brian walked in, holding my passbook and seal. As soon as he saw me, he said, "Oh, welcome back. Perfect timing. I'm going to give your savings to Elizabeth. You know she's a nail artist and has always wanted her own shop. She's been saving up, but she's about $1 million short. I remember that you have exactly $1 million saved, so I told her she could have it." He handed the passbook and seal to Elizabeth, smiling, and said, "You're lucky. This will help make your dream come true. Be grateful." I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer and snapped, "What are you talking about? That's my money. Why are you making this decision on your own? I'd understand if you wanted to lend it, but then there should be a promissory note and a repayment plan, but just giving it away without asking me?" I took the passbook and seal back from Elizabeth. Brian looked at me and said, "We're family, aren't we? It's ridiculous to need a promissory note for family members. Besides, we're not lending it, we're giving it. You don't even have a hobby because you're always working. It's a waste to just keep the money. Elizabeth has a dream. Don't you think it's more meaningful to use it to help her?" He glared at me as he finished speaking. I realized that Brian was someone I couldn't communicate with. Just as I was about to give up on the conversation, Brian said, "This money is too good for you. I'm giving it to Elizabeth because you'd only waste it. You can just work and save up again. If you want to keep arguing, we can get divorced." That gave me an idea. I quickly responded, "All right, let's get a divorce. I'll draft the divorce papers and send them to you. I'll come to pick up my things soon. Until the divorce is finalized, I'll stay at a hotel. Goodbye for now." With that, I grabbed my luggage from my business trip and left the house. Brian was shocked by my sudden decision, but he soon began sending multiple texts, saying things like, "You can still come back if you apologize now," and "Elizabeth says she'll forgive you if you give her the money. Stop being stubborn and come back." I ignored all his messages. The next day, I went to the city hall and mailed the signed divorce papers. Even then, Brian kept texting, asking if I was sure about this and telling me he was going to submit the papers. I simply replied, "Please submit them as soon as possible," and ignored the rest of his texts. The divorce was finalized sooner than I expected. A week later, while Brian was at work, I moved my things to my new place. When Brian texted me about submitting the divorce papers, he said, "I feel great being able to divorce an ugly woman like you. We are strangers now. Make sure you divide our property properly." I decided not to take most of the furniture and appliances. Instead, I deposited half of the small savings we had accumulated during our marriage into Brian's bank account and left it there. That night, I received numerous calls from Brian. At first, I ignored them, thinking it was just the beginning of his usual drama, but soon, Elizabeth also started calling me. Eventually, I answered the phone, and Brian immediately yelled, What happened to dividing the property? This is ridiculous, there's only $800 in this account. I thought. Just as I expected. I told him, look, I did divide the property. We originally had $1,600 in our joint account. I left you with half, so that's $800. All the furniture and appliances were bought after we got married, so I left them behind. That's a fair division, don't you think? I ended up with less than you. Brian wasn't convinced. He said, what are you talking about? You should have had $1 million in savings, so half of that, $500,000, should be mine. And you got an inheritance from your grandpa, which should be half mine too. I was stunned and couldn't help but laugh. I had expected this. Otherwise, I don't think Brian would have agreed to the divorce so easily. I managed to stop laughing and explained, Brian, property division is about marital assets. My savings from before we got married and my inheritance are not considered marital assets. I consulted a lawyer and divided our marital assets properly. The money we saved after marriage was all earned by me. Remember, you never contributed to our household expenses. Be grateful I even divided the savings. Brian insisted, you're lying. There's no way that's true. Hand over the money properly, or I'll sue you. His voice was shaky with desperation. I calmly replied, go ahead, do what you need to do. If you want to pursue legal action, go ahead. I told Brian, I haven't deceived you, and I divided the property fairly. I'm not afraid of being sued. Hearing this, Brian panicked and said, wait, let's forget about the divorce. I was wrong. Come back to me. He was backpedaling and asking for reconciliation. I replied, what are you talking about? The divorce is finalized, and I have no intention of going back. This is not a joke. Since this is the end, let me tell you, if you plan to stay in the house, you need to pay the rent yourself. It's about $1,800 a month. You probably didn't know, because you've never paid for it. Brian weakly responded, there's no way I can afford that. I told him, if you can't pay, then you need to leave. That's not my concern anymore. After that, it seems Brian went back to his parents' house, because he couldn't afford the rent. To cover his moving expenses, he sold the furniture and appliances I had left behind. His parents, who thought he was making a decent amount of money, welcomed him warmly, expecting it would improve their situation. However, Brian couldn't give them as much money as he had when we were together, and he seemed uncomfortable living with them. Elizabeth, who had been preparing to start her own business with the money she expected from Brian, was forced to halt her plans when she didn't receive any of my savings. This setback caused her a lot of trouble, and Brian seemed to be having a hard time with her as well, but that was no longer my problem. I've been focusing on my work and enjoying living alone. I've had enough of marriage. Brian still sends messages saying he wants to get back together, but I completely ignore them. It's almost amusing to hear him update me on his situation from time to time, but I plan to block him soon. Hey, sis, why didn't you come to Mom's funeral? What? I can't believe my own sister wouldn't show up for our mother's funeral. You're so cold-hearted. It's just awful. How could you do something like that? No decent person would. The call from my sister left me speechless. Mom had passed away 3 years ago, and we'd already had the funeral. I had no idea what she was talking about. I'm married now, raising a family. My husband and I both work, but we make sure to shower our kids with extra love and attention. He's supportive in every way, from housework to parenting, and I feel so proud of the life we've built together. I've always been determined to give my children a happy home, one they'll never question like I did when I was their age. My childhood was complicated. My parents divorced when I was in elementary school because of my mom's affair, a secret that came out because I told my dad. Everyone expects children to side with their mother, but that wasn't the case for me. My mom was far from the loving figure you'd imagine. I don't have any memories of her affection, not for me. Anyway, she only had that for my younger sister. It felt like even simple household chores were too much of a burden for her, so they became my responsibility, more of an obligation than a choice. After I exposed her affair, my mom's resentment toward me grew. She despised me for betraying her, and I was left with deep emotional and physical scars from her cruelty. When the divorce was finalized, she took my sister and left. Even so, my dad and grandparents made sure I could still see my sister regularly, at least for a while. By the time I reached middle school, the visits became less frequent. I thought it was just the natural drift of adulthood, but it turned out my sister was intentionally avoiding me. I confronted her after she turned down a few attempts to meet up. That's when she told me what our mom had said. In her eyes, I was the reason our family fell apart. She believed I was a traitor. Worse, She feared that if she stayed close to me, she'd be abandoned next. She couldn't bear to meet with me anymore, not without risking our mother's wrath. She wanted me to stop talking about it. I explained that our mom was the one who broke up the family by cheating on our dad. My sister knew about the affair too, but I was the one who told him. Even though she understood this, she still blamed me, saying I was the traitor because she had to live with our mom. She wouldn't listen, insisting it was my fault for not staying quiet and pretending everything was fine. While all this was happening, my dad got remarried, and I gained a stepmother. It felt strange at first, but my stepmother tried hard to be a good mother to me. Seeing how much effort she put in, I decided to embrace my new family and appreciate her. I stopped reaching out to my sister, and before long, we lost contact completely. I didn't feel any attachment to my biological mother, who had only ever cared about my sister. I was able to go to college and eventually found a job. Just when I was ready to repay my dad and stepmother for everything they did for me, my dad passed away in an accident. Even though we hadn't been close, I let my sister know that our dad had died. But instead of offering any sympathy, she just said, "Serves him right," and left. I expected her and my mom to come to the funeral, but they never showed up. Yet, when it was time to talk about my dad's inheritance, they both appeared out of nowhere. Everyone was shocked by how they looked, wearing flashy clothes and heavy makeup. They barely looked like the people I remembered. It seemed they enjoyed dressing up like that now. They complained that they weren't told about the inheritance meeting date and had to keep checking every day. My mom had been hanging around, hoping to join in on the inheritance discussion. I thought it would have been better if she had just come to the funeral instead. The inheritance talk was scheduled right after the funeral, so it wasn't hard to figure out. During the meeting, my mom said, "Because of you, my poor daughter suffered. You'll make sure we get a fair share, right?" Even though my parents were divorced and lived apart, my sister and I still had the right to inherit from our father. I had no plans to refuse that. However, my father didn't have a large estate, and it wasn't enough to be split among everyone. I could earn my own money, and my stepmother was still young and able to continue working. She planned to keep working for a while, so even if I gave my father's inheritance to my biological mother, my stepmother wouldn't face any financial hardship. I didn't want any more conflict, so I gave up my claim to the inheritance. My mother, however, began mocking my father, calling him stupid for making such a big deal out of her affair and pushing for a divorce. She said she only agreed to it because he was small-minded. My sister chimed in, saying it wasn't our dad who left mom, but the other way around, mocking me for living with him. They both laughed, insulting my father even though he had passed away. My sister even took a shot at me, saying it was pathetic I was raised by a man who got dumped, and that I looked older than my own mother. She ridiculed me for not having a boyfriend, saying I wasn't a real woman if I couldn't attract a man. Their cruelty stung, but I calmly asked them not to speak ill of our father, especially now that he was gone. That only provoked them more, and they accused me of being the root of all the family's problems. After a heated argument, my mother and sister told me never to contact them again and stormed out. Surprisingly, I didn't feel anger or disappointment. I just felt empty. In that moment, they were erased from my life. After they left, there was a long silence in the room, broken only when someone coughed, bringing me back to reality. The inheritance was quietly divided after that. Years later, my stepmother inherited the house my father had left behind, and I stayed there with her. Even though I was an adult, she continued to try to be a mother to me, and her support meant the world. But eventually, she became ill and had to be hospitalized. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't ask you to live with me just so you could take care of me." "I know," I replied, "but even if we lived separately, I'd still take care of you, don't worry." I visited her in the hospital during my breaks from work, wanting to be there for her as much as possible. I didn't want to feel the regret I had after my father passed away. I was determined to spend as much time with her as I could, even if it was more for my own peace of mind. During this difficult time, one person stood by me, my partner. Before we found out about my stepmother's illness, we had been talking about marriage. When the diagnosis came, I asked if we could delay it, but he suggested we go through with it to bring some comfort to my stepmother. His support was everything I needed. When the time was right, I introduced him to my stepmother. "I'm looking forward to the three of us living together," he told her, offering her the reassurance she needed. "He's a wonderful man. I have to make sure I see you in your wedding dress, for your father's sake too," my stepmother said with a smile. It seemed to be her greatest joy, and she ended up living longer than the doctors initially expected. But a few days after my wedding, she passed away, joining my father. My stepmother was wealthy, and I inherited a large sum of money. 3 years later, with what she left behind, I was able to build a happy family. However, from the start of our marriage, my husband and I had decided to live within our means and not rely on the inheritance, so we both continued working. One day, like usual, I was at work when I received a call from an unknown number on my personal phone. Assuming it was a sales call, I ignored it, but the number kept calling over and over. Thinking it might be a mistake, I finally answered at the end of the day. It was my sister, the one I had cut ties with. "Finally, why didn't you come?" "Come where? What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "How could you forget our mother's funeral?" she cried, her voice heavy with tears. "What are you talking about? Mom's funeral was 3 years ago," I replied, completely puzzled. There was a brief pause, then she spoke angrily. "Oh, maybe your stepmother died too. I'm talking about our real mother. Calling someone you're not even related to mother is disgusting." Her words irritated me, but I brushed it off, realizing she must be in shock from losing her mother. To me, though, my real mother was my stepmother. She had married my dad and taken on the role of a mother to me, a middle schooler at the time, practically overnight. I didn't fully appreciate her efforts until I had a family of my own. Raising a child without a blood connection, like through adoption, is challenging for many, but my stepmother did it without hesitation. Becoming a mother to a middle schooler all of a sudden must have been incredibly difficult for her. When I think about everything she did for me, I feel nothing but gratitude. I owe so much to her, and she is the mother I aspire to be. Blood doesn't define family. The biological mother my sister referred to never even acknowledged me. So, when I think of mother, I think of my stepmother, not the woman who gave birth to me. Realizing what my sister had meant, I answered calmly, "Oh, I see." I heard banging or stomping on the other end of the line, followed by her furious voice. "What's with that indifferent attitude? The funeral is over, and you didn't even come. It's awful not to attend your own mother's funeral. You're so cold-blooded." Even though she had a point, my sister hadn't shown up at our father's funeral either. Our father, who passed away, loved both my sister and me equally. In fact, I think he was far more caring than our mother. Neither my birth mother nor my sister attended his funeral, yet they took his inheritance and insulted him afterward. If you ask me, they are the ones who seem heartless. My sister called me indifferent, but I reminded her, "Well, we're practically strangers now, aren't we? You didn't even come to Dad's funeral, but still interfered with the inheritance. Weren't you the one who told me never to contact you again? And I just found out about our mother's death now." After a brief pause, she said softly, "Oh, I forgot. I meant to tell you about the funeral." "Well, I'm glad you remembered, but I'm renouncing any inheritance from our mother, so do whatever you want with it." With that, I hung up. A few days later, my sister called again. "Help me, Katie. Mom was apparently hinting at marriage to several men. Isn't that like marriage fraud? They're threatening to sue me if I don't pay compensation." "Then just pay them," I replied. "If I could, I wouldn't be calling you. It's not just one or two men, and some of them seem pretty dangerous." "That's tough," I said, "but remember, you're the one who told me not to contact you. Plus, you already knew Mom had a history with men. She cheated on Dad when he was alive, and it wasn't just one affair. If it had only been one person, maybe our father could have forgiven her, thinking it was just a mistake, but she had multiple affairs, and only our father truly knew the depth of her betrayals. I think that's why he tried to adopt you several times through a lawyer, but you didn't want to leave Mom. You chose to stay with her, even though you saw how irresponsible she was." My sister struggled to respond, muttering, "Well, I continued, "You called me a traitor, remember? I don't need a sister who sees me that way. You were the one who declared us strangers first, so don't come around now acting like family. It's a nuisance. Don't ever contact me again, we're strangers." After all, I hung up without waiting for her response, blocked her number, and returned to my home where my family was waiting for me. Later, I received a call from my biological mother's relatives. They apologized for the way my mother and sister had treated me, but for me, it was already over. I decided to listen to what my relatives had to say. They remembered how poorly my mom treated me and were shocked that she had the nerve to go after my father's inheritance after we had cut ties. They apologized for letting her visit me while I was still grieving, but I assured them that it was all in the past. Next, they told me about my sister. Apparently, she was just as reckless with men as our mother had been. Ever since she came back, The relatives had warned her that she would face consequences if she didn't change her behavior. Instead of listening, my sister became exactly like our mother, and the family could no longer control her actions. Mom got involved with bad men, and my sister was dragged into illegal activities because of it. Feeling trapped, my sister started dating multiple men at once, leading to several heated confrontations. The relatives finally told her they would cut ties if she didn't turn her life around. When our mother died, they followed through with that decision since my sister was an adult. Right after our mother's funeral, there was another confrontation, and since then, no one has known where my sister went. The relatives advised me not to get involved with her anymore. I hadn't planned on it anyway, but I couldn't help feeling a little sorry for her. Maybe there was some sympathy to be found in the fact that she got pulled into criminal activities. Still, there must have been ways for her to make things right. If she didn't, that's on her. That's what I decided after the call ended. As I hung up, I heard my husband and children laughing in the next room. I felt a strong need to protect the family I had now, and I resolved to live my life using my mother and sister as examples of what not to become.